Hi, and welcome to ITSP Magazine. Today we're sitting here at RSA 2024, and I have Adrien from CyberPeace. It's a really special occasion to have Adrien out here all the way from Geneva. CyberPeace is an incredible organization, and I'm happy to be able to share more with the rest of you. Adrien, tell me a little bit more about yourself.
Well, thanks for having me first, Christina. I'm Adrien, the Chief Operations Officer of the CyberPeace Institute. I'm an engineer by trade, French engineer. I've spent my entire career in cybersecurity, working for the French government, working for the European Union, working for the World Economic Forum, and most recently for the CyberPeace Institute, a non-profit based in Geneva, as you mentioned, in Switzerland, that looks after the stability of cyberspace. So our mission is to protect the most vulnerable people on Earth, make sure that they're not getting attacked, and work with governments to develop systemic solutions to improve the stability of cyberspace.
Tell me a little bit more about the history of CyberPeace.
So the Institute was set up in 2019 as a non-profit, a Swiss foundation, thanks to the impetus of a few American philanthropic organizations and American corporations. And the organization was set up in view of protecting the most vulnerable, as I mentioned, with three core objectives. One, an advocacy mission, so to address the United Nations, the Paris Peace Forum, the Internet Governance Forum, and raise the awareness of policymakers around the world in terms of how vulnerable people suffer because of cyber attacks. The advocacy that we do is evidence-based. So we have a team of analysts that look at what's happening around the world, cyber phenomena like happened during the pandemic, for instance, and all the attacks against healthcare organizations that unfortunately we witnessed, or the cybersecurity incidents that are happening currently in the context of the war in Ukraine that are having profound consequences for civilians. And so we use those data to address policymakers with evidence that is ours, that is mixing open source intelligence that we collect through a variety of sources, but also closed source intelligence through the work that our operations team does and which I have the privilege of leading. So we're working with around 300 nonprofits around the world active in humanitarian relief, in child protection, in food banks, shelter organizations looking after various vulnerable communities, and that are unfortunately oftentimes defenseless when it comes to cyber attacks. We use the term cyber poor target rich organizations because they are targeted not just by criminals, but also very much by state actors. And so the asymmetry in terms of the resources they have to protect themselves versus the resources that attackers have to attack them is extremely imbalanced. This is a big issue because governments and industry alike are struggling to provide help to organizations that are ill-funded and that have a real hard time to prioritize cybersecurity over their core mission. And so we have created a network of volunteers, cybersecurity experts, all coming from industry, from about 50 different companies, many of them represented here at RSA, that are contributing a couple of hours each year to help those nonprofits with things ranging from a phishing simulation to giving them advice on how to implement second-factor authentication, to helping them draft their incident response policy, to helping them manage an incident whenever they get compromised, ransomware attacks or defacements or DDoS attacks. And so volunteers step in and help those organizations protect themselves. We're trying to do even more, trying to extend threat intel protection programs to those organizations and working with a variety of threat intelligence providers, trying to make sure that those organizations are protected. In the process, we understand better how they are being harmed, how the vulnerable communities that they protect around the world are being harmed, and what governments need to change.
What are the challenges that nonprofits are currently facing today, and how is CyberPeace? You did talk a little bit how CyberPeace is helping them, but how is CyberPeace helping with some of the specific challenges that you can share with us that the nonprofits are experiencing?
So, most nonprofits face three types of main challenges. They are being attacked for the data that they have. Many nonprofits hold very sensitive data about refugees, migrants, about war informants. For instance, the International Committee of the Red Cross was attacked 2 years ago. and attackers were looking after personal information of people crossing the Mediterranean Sea, leaving war zones and trying to get into Europe. And so you can imagine that repressive regimes getting their hands on such data would be available to then monitor the activities of people who have fled war zones, see where their families are, and further a circle of violence that these people were trying to get out from. Non-profits are also unfortunately attacked for the money that they have. We often think of the non-profit sector as not in financial terms, right? But the non-profit economy moved around $2 trillion a year. And those organizations themselves move a lot of money. They have a lot of financial transactions. So there's a lot of potential for CEO fraud attacks, for ransomware attacks. We see a lot of non-profits recently falling for indiscriminate ransomware attacks, criminal groups that are renting infrastructure, so ransomware as a service types of attacks, and that are stumbling upon non-profits because they are connected to the internet, they use certain platforms, they have certain vulnerabilities, and they fall for criminal attacks. And when criminals realize that they have targeted a non-profit, see like the directors of non-profits end up chatting with them, or our volunteers help them. The response from criminals isn't, sorry, you're a non-profit protecting children around the world, like here are the keys to decrypt your files, and sorry about that. No, their answer is, we're sorry, and we're going to offer you a discount.
Right.
And so they still consider non-profits as legitimate targets. And last but not least, the third reason why many non-profits also get attacked is because of the very operations that they run, because of the services they provide to populations in war zones, for instance. Think of the conflict happening right now in Gaza. Think of the conflict in Ukraine. You have adversaries that are interested in harming those organizations that are providing vital services. Think of demining organizations, for instance, in Ukraine and around the world. There is actually a non-profit here in California that got hit a couple of years back, and they are providing demining services in Afghanistan. They lost over $1 million because of such an attack. So unfortunately, non-profits are increasingly targeted by criminals. They're also targeted by state actors, and their level of defense is really low. And we're talking about the organizations protecting the most vulnerable people on earth. How can we let that happen? We need all to step in. Industry, individuals, academia, governments, obviously, we need all to step in to do our part and help protect them.
I know CyberPeace was doing a lot of work during the pandemic, and that there are a couple of databases with the cyber incident tracers. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, thank you for that question. Our incident tracers are platforms that are open to the public that you can readily access on our websites that track cybersecurity incidents happening in a particular context. We have a couple of such tracers, one that we released during the pandemic that has been tracking incidents against healthcare organizations. Our objective with those trackers and the one we developed in Ukraine the conflict in Ukraine, aim to provide hard evidence on how cybersecurity attacks are being leveraged by adversaries in context of vulnerabilities, whether a war zone, whether a pandemic, and those contexts of vulnerabilities are being used to further prey on already vulnerable people. We think that there's a baseline, there's a threshold that should not be crossed when it comes to affecting vulnerable communities. And unfortunately, we see an acceleration in the number of attacks that are preying on people that should not be attacked in the first place. I don't think that anyone in this planet, and I certainly do not hope that anyone in this planet would agree that it is okay to prey on orphans, to prey on women that are being beaten by their husbands, to prey on people fleeing in war zones. Those people are already in a very difficult situation. Like, how can we accept that they are further preyed upon? So those tracers are collective evidence mechanisms for us all to remember of those situations and hopefully to effect change at the highest level, at government level, at the UN level, so that we can have mechanisms in place to prevent such situations from arising again. A couple of examples of things that we are trying to do. We call out governments, for instance, to make sure that they themselves do not get involved into attacking healthcare organizations. We call them out so that they increase pressure on criminal groups to prosecute attacks on those particular populations and work with a variety of actors, including industry, to effect such pressure.
There is a lot of suffering in the world going on right now, and there really always has been, but cybercrime has helped that kind of explode, and there have been a lot of victims of cybercrime globally. What are your thoughts on cybercrime around the world and different regions? For example, I know you and I were discussing cybercrime in Asia, and I also recently had a conversation where we were talking about the global borders, how when it comes to technology, there is no physical border. So when it comes to suffering, this is a global issue, and we all really need to help and help these people ease that suffering and find the relief that they need. How is CyberPeace helping in those areas?
So what we're seeing based on the research that we're doing, for instance, in the Asia-Pacific region, in Europe, in humanitarian context around the world, is that the threats are relatively similar around the globe, with particular specificities depending on events, large events that are happening. For instance, an earthquake in Morocco will lead to increased scams on donors and organizations that are trying to raise funds to help in the context of that earthquake. We see, for instance, in APAC, a lot of scams involving romance scams, for instance, QR code scams. A lot of people in those regions use Android phones with applications that are not always coming from the official app store, and so they're getting attacked through those mechanisms. Some countries in Asia use digital banking quite heavily, use electronic invoicing systems as well that are provided by the government, and so criminals find ways to spoof the identity of those platforms or even the government and have people click on the wrong link. But at the end of the day, those types of social engineering techniques are the same everywhere around the world. Now, the biggest trend that we're all seeing happening in the last 5 to 10 years is the rise of ransomware. And now with the explosion of ransomware as a service, we're seeing organizations that in the past were safe from those types of threats, like non-profits. Non-profits were not getting ransomed 5 years ago because criminal groups were really trying to go after the high-paying, potentially high-paying victims, right? Critical infrastructure operators, large organizations, healthcare organizations, large governments. And these days we see a lot of smaller criminal groups. I wouldn't call them script kiddies. They're already organized. They have hierarchies. They have processes. So those are organized criminal groups, but perhaps not as famous as Lockbit or others that are targeting smaller organizations, small businesses, non-profits. And so the increase in ransomware is a huge source of concerns to us because it's extremely difficult to prevent. We need strong defense mechanisms that many of these organizations are not able to put in place. And the consequences are dire. There's actually a hospital here in Illinois that had to close down after a ransomware attack because they if they were to pay the ransom, they wouldn't have cash anymore to pay their doctors, which means that it creates medical desert in a certain area of the US. And we see those situations arising in many other places around the world. And again, criminals do not know who they're targeting. They're just targeting everything they can and then try and get a ransom. If they can, great. If they cannot, they move on to the next target and don't let you decrypt your files.
Absolutely.
So it's a concerning situation.
Yes, it is. What can we see from CyberPeace in the coming years?
So we're working with a number of international partners, some of them here in the US and others, to try and structure volunteer networks around the world to effect even more change and have an even bigger impact. So we are hoping that we can grow the numbers of non-profits that we help around the world to thousands and thousands. We're hoping that more and more organizations, private companies are going to rally to the cause and join this huge volunteering movement. The US government, CISA, has just launched an initiative in April, so last month, to protect high-risk communities. And cyber volunteer networks make up for a fantastic opportunity to provide talent to those under-resourced organizations. So any organization that's listening to me at the moment, if you're interested in having your staff contribute to a great cause, have them look up the CyberPeace Builders, which is the name of our volunteer network. Mm-hmm. We're also working with governments, with the UN and various other think tanks on a harm methodology to more precisely determine the impacts of cyber attacks. Too often we limit ourselves to financial considerations, but cyber attacks have profound consequences on the lives of people, psychological impacts, even physiological impacts, right? People commit suicide because of disinformation campaigns, because of hate speech. So we need to start thinking about the impacts of cybersecurity attacks in much more granular terms, and that's what we're doing with various governments around the world to help them also think about the response they need to apply in order to protect vulnerable communities.
Okay. One question that comes to mind as you're speaking about all of this is, what can we do? What does CyberPeace need? This is an issue that is near and dear to my heart, and like many cybersecurity professionals, I came into the industry because I wanted to help keep other people safe. Like you mentioned, there's a lot of crime, there's a lot of cybercrime in all different aspects and areas and industries, whether it is healthcare, financial, but also the direct and personal impact to families, to children, to people who are committing suicide because of ransom situations. The fact that people can die if there is a hack at a hospital, these are all very critical issues that the cyber industry is trying to always get ahead of it. We're always trying to defend. So what does CyberPeace need? And how can we get involved?
How can one get involved? There's so many ways to get involved. My first answer is just start. Just try and connect with us, connect with the nonprofit cyber community. There's an entire community of nonprofit organizations here in the US and around the world that are protecting the core infrastructure of the internet, that are protecting vulnerable organizations around the world, that are working with industry and government to secure our systems, to secure the technologies that are being developed here and in many other countries. So, it's just a matter of trying to connect with those organizations and see how you can contribute depending on your skills, depending on your time, depending on your availabilities, but there's opportunities all across. There's opportunities for students to collaborate, to help state, local, tribal, and territorial organizations in their state in the US or around the world, right? Cyber clinics led by the consortium of cyber clinics at UC Berkeley. There's opportunity for professionals with the CyberPeace Builders to come and help nonprofits again around the world. There's opportunities for private companies to share some of their tools for free, like many are doing with us. They're giving us their tools for free so that we can protect better vulnerable organizations. And there are many organizations here that have corporate social responsibility programs, ESG programs, that are looking at ways in which they can align their business purpose with their social impact. And so my main message is, just try. You'll see there's an entire community of hackers in government, in industry, individual hackers that are trying to do good, trying to make sure that the situation in which we find ourselves, which is extremely dire, we cannot go around this. The fact that orphans are being preyed upon using technologies that we've developed here is senseless.
Absolutely.
So there's ways in which we can reverse that trend, and we just got to get started.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for coming to speak to us here at RSA, and we're happy to have you here on ITSP Magazine. I really appreciate everything that you are doing, everything that CyberPeace is doing to help with the suffering that we're seeing in the world today. Thank you. It's been
Thank you, Christina.
great having
Thank you so much.
Adrien.
My pleasure.
Thank
It's an
you.
honor.
Thank you guys for tuning in. We're here, ITSP Magazine at RSA 2024. And once again, if you're looking to get involved with helping keep people safe, whether you are an organization or an individual, please look up different organizations and nonprofits like CyberPeace to see how you can get involved and how you can help people remain safe online. Thank you so much. Bye.